Isabella Stanton lived a life most girls only dreamed of. From the moment she woke up in her opulent bedroom, surrounded by the finest silks and the most exquisite decor, to the evenings spent gazing out at the glittering city skyline from her private balcony, her life was a tapestry of luxury and elegance. Every day was a new adventure in high fashion and sophistication. Her days were filled with designer clothes, sparkling jewels, and vacations on private islands. Shopping sprees in the most exclusive boutiques where she would pick out the latest collections from top designers were a regular occurrence. Her wardrobe was a treasure trove of haute couture, each piece more stunning than the last. And the jewels, oh the jewels! Diamonds, emeralds, sapphires and rubies adorned her, each piece a testament to her family's immense wealth. Her father, Robert Stanton, was a titan of industry, his name synonymous with wealth and power. He was a man of vision and ambition, a leader who commanded respect and admiration. At gala events, he was the star, delivering speeches that captivated audiences and sealing deals with a firm handshake. His portrait hung in his office, a constant reminder of the legacy he had built and the empire he ruled.
I adored my father. He was more than just a successful businessman. He was my hero. Our bond was unbreakable, forged through years of love, trust, and shared dreams. I looked up to him in every way, and his approval meant the world to me. Every hug, every smile, every moment we shared was a precious memory etched in my heart. He was my rock, my confidant, the one person I knew I could always rely on. Whether we were walking in the park, discussing life in the cozy warmth of our living room, or simply enjoying each other's company, he was always there for me. His wisdom guided me, his strength supported me, and his love enveloped me like a protective shield.
But beneath the surface of their charmed lives, a storm was brewing. The perfect facade of their existence was beginning to crack, revealing the turmoil that lay beneath. Tensions were rising, and the once harmonious family dinners were now filled with unspoken worries and anxious glances. Isabella could sense the change, the growing unease that seemed to permeate every corner of their lives. Robert's empire, built on a foundation of ambition and risk, was crumbling. The very pillars that had supported their lavish lifestyle were now shaking, threatening to collapse under the weight of financial instability. The stock market was in turmoil, and the once steady flow of wealth was now a trickle. Robert's stress was palpable, his once confident demeanor now overshadowed by worry and fear. Years of risky investments and a changing market had taken their toll. The headlines in the financial newspapers were grim, painting a bleak picture of the economic landscape. Robert spent countless hours poring over documents, trying to find a way out of the financial quagmire. The boardroom, once a place of triumph and celebration, was now a silent witness to his struggles, with papers scattered like the remnants of a lost battle. Robert was facing ruin, and the weight of the world was on his shoulders. The isolation of his office mirrored the isolation he felt within, as he grappled with the enormity of the situation. His face, once a mask of confidence, now bore the lines of worry and despair. The burden of his decisions, the fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to build, was almost too much to bear. He needed a solution, and fast. Time was running out, and the pressure was mounting. Every phone call, every meeting, every moment was a race against the clock. Robert's determination was unwavering, but the odds were stacked against him. The stakes were higher than ever, and the future of the Stanton Empire hung in the balance. The once unshakable foundation of their lives was now a fragile construct, teetering on the brink of collapse. The mahogany-paneled study was oppressive tonight. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of the world pressing down on Robert's shoulders. The room, once a sanctuary of wisdom and power, now felt like a prison, trapping him in a web of impossible choices and looming despair. The air hung heavy with cigar smoke and desperation. Each puff of the cigar seemed to add another layer of tension, another reminder of the stakes at hand. The smoke curled and twisted, much like Robert's thoughts, clouding his judgment and suffocating his hope. Robert paced, his face etched with worry. His footsteps echoed in the silent room, a rhythmic reminder of the urgency of his predicament. He'd always been a man of action, a man who thrived on control and decisiveness. But tonight he felt powerless, a puppet to forces beyond his control. His gaze fell upon a framed photograph on his desk. A younger, carefree Robert with his wife and their baby girl. His heart ached. The photograph was a relic of happier times. a stark contrast to the present turmoil. It was a reminder of what he stood to lose, of the family he had sworn to protect. The smiles in the photograph seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder of the innocence and joy that now felt so distant.
I have to protect Isabella, even if it means making an impossible choice. The words echoed in his mind, a mantra of determination and despair. He knew the cost of inaction, the price of failure. Isabella was his world, his reason for fighting. But the choice before him was a bitter pill to swallow, a sacrifice that tore at his very soul.
There was one option, one lifeline. It was a fragile thread, a glimmer of hope in the darkness, but it was fraught with peril, a double-edged sword that could save or destroy him. The weight of the decision was crushing, a burden that threatened to break him. An old business associate had offered a solution, a way out of the financial abyss. It was a deal that promised salvation, a merger that could restore his crumbling empire, but it was not without its costs, not without its sacrifices. The associate was a shrewd man, a master of the game. He knew the value of leverage, the power of desperation. A merger, a lifeline, but it came with a hefty price, his daughter's hand in marriage. The proposal was as old as time, a union of convenience, a transaction dressed in the guise of tradition. It was a bitter irony, a cruel twist of fate. Isabella, his precious daughter, was to be the pawn in this game of power and survival, and not just to anyone but to the associate's son, a man Isabella had never even met. The thought was unbearable, a dagger to his heart. Isabella was a free spirit, a woman of dreams and aspirations. To bind her to a stranger, to a man chosen not for love but for necessity, was a betrayal of everything he held dear. But what choice did he have? The empire was crumbling, the walls closing in. He was a man on the brink, a father desperate to save his daughter, even at the cost of her happiness. The grand dining room, usually filled with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses, was unnaturally silent. The chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their crystals catching the light but reflecting none of the joy that usually permeated the room. The long polished table, which had seen countless feasts and celebrations, now seemed like a cold, uninviting expanse of wood. Isabella sat across from her father, his face grim, his words echoing in her ears. The air was thick with tension, and the silence between them was almost palpable. She could see the weight of his words pressing down on him, making him look older and more worn than she had ever seen him before.
You are to marry Thomas.
His voice was strained, each word seeming to cost him a great deal of effort. It was as if he was fighting against some invisible force, trying to push the words out despite the resistance. Thomas, the family driver, a man who had always been a shadow in the background of their lives. He was reliable, always there when needed, but never someone who was part of their inner circle. He was a fixture, like the old grandfather clock in the hallway, always present but never truly noticed.
Marry Thomas?
Isabella repeated, her voice barely a whisper. It was absurd, unthinkable. The very idea seemed to defy all logic and reason. She felt as if she had stepped into some alternate reality where up was down and black was white. She was Isabella Stanton, heiress to a fortune, and he was the driver. The disparity between their worlds was vast, like a chasm that could never be bridged. She'd been raised in luxury, surrounded by wealth and privilege, while he had always been on the periphery, a servant in her family's grand estate. The world tilted on its axis. Everything she had known, everything she had taken for granted, was suddenly thrown into chaos. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, leaving her unsteady and unsure. Her father, her rock, was asking the impossible. The man who had always been her protector, her guide, was now the one shattering her world. She could see the pain in his eyes, the struggle he was going through, but it did little to lessen the blow. Betrayal and confusion warred within her. She felt as if she was being torn in two, her heart and mind pulling her in different directions. On one hand, she wanted to trust her father, to believe that he had a good reason for this shocking announcement. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sense that he was asking her to give up everything she had ever known and step into a life that was completely foreign to her. Isabella's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why Thomas? Why now? What could possibly have driven her father to make such a drastic decision? She searched his face for answers, but all she saw was the same grim determination that had been there from the start. Memories of happier times flooded her mind. She remembered the days when her father would lift her onto his shoulders, making her feel like she was on top of the world. She remembered the warmth of his embrace. the sound of his laughter. How had they come to this point, where he was now the source of her greatest turmoil? The family portrait on the wall seemed to mock her. In it they were all smiling, a picture-perfect family. But now that image felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of a time that seemed so distant and unreachable. Isabella stood up from the table, her mind made up. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she couldn't just sit there and let it be decided for her. She had to take control, to find out the truth behind her father's shocking announcement. With a determined stride, she walked out of the dining room, leaving her father behind. She needed answers, and she was going to get them no matter what it took. Isabella was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer the sheltered heiress, but a woman determined to take control of her own destiny. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow over the grand estate, Isabella felt a glimmer of hope. This was just the beginning of her journey, and she was ready to face it head-on. The days that followed were a blur of anger, confusion, and disbelief. Isabella sought solace in the only way she knew how, losing herself in the luxurious world she had always known and cherished. She shopped for designer dresses she didn't need, adorned herself with jewels that felt heavy on her skin like a burden.
How could he do this to me?
But the glittering facade couldn't mask the hurt, the sense of betrayal that gnawed at her heart. Determined to understand, Isabella decided to confront her father, to unravel